The courtroom was quiet. Only the sound of papers turning and soft whispers filled the air. People were waiting for the next case to begin. The doors opened, and a young man in a sharp blue suit walked in with confidence. His name was Jason Carter, a new lawyer, fresh out of law school and full of pride. He walked with his head high, holding his files like a champion. Everyone noticed him. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Jason smiled at the attention. This was his first real case, and he wanted to make sure everyone remembered his name. He sat down, glanced at the file, and laughed under his breath. "Too easy," he whispered. The case was against an old black woman named Eliza Daniels. She was being accused of not paying rent for the past 6 months in a small apartment owned by a wealthy landlord. Jason didn't even read all the details. He thought, how hard could this be? A few minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. Slowly, Eliza walked in. She was wearing a plain brown dress and holding a small purse. Her gray hair was tied back, and her steps were slow but steady. She looked calm, peaceful, quiet. Jason looked at her and chuckled. "This is going to be fun," he said softly to himself. The judge called the court to order. Jason stood up and gave his opening words. He was loud, confident, smiling too much. "Your Honor, this case is simple. My client has waited long enough. The tenant, Miss Daniels, refuses to pay rent. She has no job, no proof of payment, and no defense. We ask the court to give the order to remove her immediately." People nodded. It did sound simple. Then it was Eliza's turn. She stood slowly, walked to the front, and looked at the judge. Her hands were shaking a little, but her voice was clear. "Your Honor, I'm not here to fight. I only ask for a little time. I have lived in that apartment for 30 years. My husband died there. My children grew up there. I've never missed rent before, but this year has been hard." Jason rolled his eyes. "Here come the stories," he said, loud enough for people to hear. The judge gave him a sharp look. "Mr. Carter, you'll wait your turn." But Jason didn't stop. He interrupted again. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a courtroom, not a place for bedtime stories." The room fell silent. Eliza didn't react. She just looked at Jason and said quietly, "You speak like a man who knows everything. But sometimes knowing too much can stop you from learning what truly matters." Jason laughed. "And now she's giving me life lessons." The judge was not amused. "Mr. Carter, one more disrespectful comment, and I'll hold you in contempt." Jason sat down, but his eyes were full of pride. He still thought he would win easily. After the hearing ended for the day, people left the courtroom with mixed feelings. Some whispered, "That old lady, she has something in her eyes. Something strong." The janitor who was sweeping near the door looked at the name on the case paper and paused. "Eliza Daniels," he said quietly. "I've heard that name before." Later that night, Jason celebrated with his friends. "I crushed it today," he bragged. That old woman didn't stand a chance. But while Jason was laughing in a fancy restaurant, Eliza sat alone in her small apartment. She opened an old wooden box and pulled out a dusty photo. It was a picture of her in a black judge's robe, standing in front of a courtroom many years ago. She placed the photo on the table, looked at it for a moment, and whispered, "I didn't want to come back. But maybe it's time they remember who I was." Outside her window, the night was quiet, but something had begun. A story that would soon shake the very walls of that courtroom. The next day in court started just like any other. The judge entered, everyone stood, and the cases were called one by one. But something felt different today. People who weren't even part of the case had come to watch. The gallery was full. Jason walked in confidently again, holding his files like a trophy. He wore a brighter suit today, and had even fixed his hair differently. "They all saw how I handled it yesterday," he told himself. "Today, she won't even speak." Eliza entered a few minutes later, calm, silent, She wore the same brown dress, but this time she had a small notebook in her hand. Her steps were slow, but her eyes were sharp. Jason smirked as she passed by. "Back again for another story, Miss Daniels." Eliza didn't respond. She simply took her seat and looked straight at the judge. The judge looked at both of them and said, "Mr. Carter, we'll hear your arguments first. Please proceed." Jason stood and smiled. "Thank you, Your Honor. Yesterday we heard excuses, emotional stories that have no place in legal arguments. But today I bring proof. Bank statements, signed rental agreements, and—" Eliza raised her hand. "Your Honor, may I speak before he finishes?" Jason laughed. "She wants to interrupt now." The judge nodded. "Go ahead, Miss Daniels." Eliza stood. She opened her notebook. Her hands were steady now. She turned to the audience and then looked back at the judge. "I wasn't going to say anything more, but last night I remembered something, a promise I made to my late husband, that I would never let anyone shame me for my silence. So here I am, ready to speak my truth." She paused, looked at Jason, and continued, "I may look old and poor to you, Mr. Carter, but there's something you should know about me. I've been in this courtroom before, not as a defendant, but as a judge." The courtroom gasped. Jason's smile disappeared. "Excuse me?" he asked, suddenly unsure of his voice. "I was the first black woman judge in this district," Eliza said. "I served for 27 years. My robe is still hanging in my closet. I retired 5 years ago when my health declined. The apartment you say I don't pay for, do you even know who built that building?" Jason opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "I helped fund it. Back when no one believed a black woman could be a lawyer, I worked 2 jobs to get my degree. I've written laws. I've corrected young men like you in this very room." The judge leaned forward. "Is this true?" Eliza nodded. "You can check the records. I didn't bring it up before because I didn't want pity. I just wanted time. That's all." Jason's hands began to shake. He flipped through his papers, but nothing helped him now. His face turned red. Eliza looked at him, her voice calm but strong. "The law is not about power or pride, Mr. Carter. It's about justice. You came in here thinking this was an easy win because of how I look, but you never took time to see who I really was." The room was silent. Everyone stared at Jason. The people in the gallery began whispering to each other. The judge cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Carter, would you like to respond?" Jason stood, but his words stumbled. I wasn't aware of any of this, Your Honor. I apologize if I spoke out of turn." Eliza gently smiled. "You didn't speak out of turn, young man. You spoke from a place of ignorance. I only hope this experience teaches you something before you ruin someone else's life." The judge paused for a long moment. Then he said, "Court will resume tomorrow. I suggest both sides prepare carefully. But let the record show. This courtroom just learned something more valuable than any law book could teach." As everyone left the room, Jason walked slower than before. He didn't hold his files like trophies now. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. And Eliza, she walked out with her head high, her step steady, and her notebook closed. She had reminded everyone, not with anger, not with pride, but with quiet strength, who she truly was. And that was just the beginning. As Eliza Daniels walked out of the courtroom, the warm sunlight hit her face. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let it touch her skin. After everything that had happened, she felt peace, not because she had won, but because she had stood up for herself without losing her grace. Reporters were waiting outside. Cameras clicked. Microphones pushed toward her. "Miss Daniels, how did it feel to prove the young lawyer wrong? What message do you want to give to the world today?" She simply smiled and said, "Never judge a book by its cover, and never mistake silence for weakness." Then she walked past them, ignoring the chaos, just as she was about to leave the building. A young woman in a gray suit stopped her. "Are you Eliza Daniels?" The woman asked gently. "Yes," Eliza replied. "I have a letter for you. It's from the state. They've been trying to reach you." Eliza took the envelope with a confused look. She hadn't expected anything official. She opened it slowly, her fingers slightly shaking. As she read, her lips parted, her eyes widened. The hallway around her seemed to disappear. The letter was from the governor's office. It said, "Dear Miss Daniels, your decades of service as a judge and your recent actions in court have come to our attention. In recognition of your lifelong dedication to justice, we would be honored to present you with the Lifetime Achievement Award at the State Legal Honor Ceremony. Furthermore, we would like to invite you to lead a new mentorship program for young lawyers across the state. Your voice is needed now more than ever. Sincerely, Governor's Office." Eliza blinked several times. Her hand clutched the paper tightly. She wasn't just being acknowledged, she was being called back. Not to return to the bench, but to guide others, to share her story, to be a symbol. Jason Carter, the young lawyer who had once mocked her, saw her standing there with the letter. He had followed her outside, unsure of what to say. But when he saw the tear roll down her cheek and the smile on her lips, he knew this wasn't just about a courtroom win. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly. Eliza looked at him and nodded. "More than okay." Jason hesitated, then added, "You know, if you're going to teach young lawyers, I'd be honored to learn from you. I clearly need it." She gave a soft chuckle. "The first step is knowing you still have things to learn." Jason smiled for the first time in days. "Then I'm ready." Weeks later, the hall was filled with hundreds of people, judges, lawyers, law students, even ordinary citizens who had seen Eliza's story on the news. The Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony was being broadcast live. The governor stepped up to the microphone and said, "Today, we honor not just a legal mind, but a strong heart, a woman who didn't shout to be heard, but let her actions speak louder than words." Eliza Daniels walked to the stage. Dressed in a cream-colored gown, she looked powerful. Her steps were steady, proud. When she spoke, her voice was calm. "I once thought my time was over. I believed my work was done. But now I understand. Wisdom doesn't retire. It evolves. And so must we." She looked into the audience. Jason Carter was there, sitting in the front row, eyes filled with respect. "I stand here not because I'm perfect, but because I refuse to let judgment, racism, or age define me. I thank you all, not for this award, but for giving me back my purpose." The crowd stood. Applause echoed through the hall. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Jason clapped the loudest. That night, Eliza went home, placed the award on her bookshelf, and looked out her window at the stars. She whispered to herself, "Dignity is louder than any insult. Truth is stronger than any lie. And sometimes the greatest comebacks come when no one's expecting them." Her story had ended in the courtroom, but her legacy was just beginning. The court was quieter than ever. Even the judge, known for strict rules and a stern tone, looked stunned. Eliza Daniels sat tall, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. She had just finished telling her truth, the truth that no one expected. She had been a judge. She had written the very law that this case was now using. She had once trained the older lawyer who now sat beside Jason Carter, defending her. And Jason? He couldn't move. His face had lost all color. His pride had melted into shame. All he could hear was her voice repeating in his mind. "I was silent, not because I didn't know the law. I was silent because I knew when to speak." Now, the courtroom waited. The judge cleared his throat and said, "Miss Daniels, it seems we owe you more than an apology." But Eliza shook her head slowly. "I don't want an apology, Your Honor. I want people to stop assuming that quiet means weak, and that age means finished." Jason stood up. He looked at the judge, then at Eliza. "Your Honor, may I say something?" The judge nodded. Jason stepped forward, nervous. I didn't know who she was. I just saw an old woman sitting alone. And I thought she was lost. I mocked her. I was wrong. He turned to Eliza directly. I let my pride speak louder than my respect. You didn't just school me on the law. You reminded me why I even became a lawyer. And I'm truly sorry. There was silence again, but this time it was heavy with emotion. Then, surprisingly, Eliza smiled. You're still young. It's not too late to learn. Jason blinked, surprised. You'd be willing to help me? Eliza nodded. If you're really ready to listen. The judge looked around the room, then said something that would shock everyone watching the trial. This case is dismissed. Miss Daniels, your name is cleared, though in my eyes, it never needed clearing. But more than that, I want to ask you something. Everyone leaned in. I want you to join the State Legal Ethics Board. You have wisdom we need. The courtroom gasped. Jason's mouth opened, stunned. Eliza raised an eyebrow. Are you sure a woman my age is still useful? The judge chuckled. Miss Daniels, you're more than useful. You're necessary. As the courtroom emptied later that day, people walked up to her. Some asked for pictures. Others simply offered hugs. She was no longer just an old woman. She was a legend. Outside the courthouse, Jason followed her quietly as they stepped into the sunlight. His steps were slower now, not out of fear, but respect. Eliza, he said softly. She turned. Why didn't you just tell everyone who you were from the start? Eliza smiled. Because sometimes, it's not about shouting who you are. It's about letting the truth speak at the right time. Jason nodded. He understood now. They stood there for a few moments. Then Jason said, Do you think, maybe one day I could be like you? Eliza laughed gently. With time, humility, and a whole lot of listening, you might just surprise yourself. He grinned. Well, I'm ready to learn. Eliza started walking down the stairs. Good. Your first lesson begins now. Jason blinked. Now. She didn't turn around, just called over her shoulder. Rule number 1, never be late to court, even if the case isn't yours. Jason jogged to catch up, laughing for the first time that week. Back at Eliza's home that night, she placed the judge's note on her kitchen table. It was an official request. Join the legal board. Help fix what was broken in the system. She looked around her quiet house. Family photos, books, her late husband's old law books still sitting on a shelf. And now her story wasn't just part of history. It was shaping the future. 3 weeks had passed since the trial that changed everything. The video clip of Eliza Daniels calmly revealing her true identity had gone viral. Millions watched as the quiet old lady stunned a courtroom full of people, including a young, arrogant lawyer who thought he knew it all. The story had touched hearts across the country. News channels called her the Silent Storm. Law students quoted her words in class. Social media was filled with messages like, she didn't yell, she didn't fight, she just let the truth walk in quietly and take the room. But for Eliza, life remained simple. She still watered her garden every morning, still sat on her porch with her tea. But now something had changed. People finally saw her for who she really was. And one of those people was Jason Carter. Monday morning, Legal Ethics Office. Jason walked nervously into the large building. He straightened his tie 3 times and wiped his sweaty palms on his coat. He was there to start his mentorship under Eliza. She sat inside a glass-walled meeting room, calmly flipping through a file. When she saw him, she smiled. Late by 2 minutes. Jason froze. It was the traffic. She raised a hand. Lesson 2. Excuses are louder than mistakes. Don't use them. Jason sat down fast, nodding. Yes, Mom. She handed him a thick folder. These are cases where young lawyers made big mistakes. I want you to study them. Jason opened the file and blinked. Wait, this first case, This is one of mine. Eliza looked at him. Exactly. And I want you to learn from it. Jason sighed, then nodded. All right. Where do I begin? Eliza stood and walked to the whiteboard. By admitting you're not here to prove yourself, you're here to improve yourself. Later that week, a school visit. Eliza was invited to speak at a local high school. The students didn't know who she was, just that a retired lawyer was coming to speak. She stepped into the classroom in a plain blue dress and soft shoes. At first, the students whispered and laughed quietly. Some looked bored. Then she started speaking. When I was 22, I was told I couldn't be a lawyer because I was a woman, and because I was black. They said I didn't look like a lawyer. But I looked in the mirror and saw someone who was already one. The class fell silent. She continued. Sometimes power walks in quietly. It doesn't always wear a suit or carry a loud voice. Sometimes power is knowing when to speak and when to simply stand tall. A girl in the front row raised her hand slowly. Ma'am, why didn't you tell them who you were that day in court? Eliza smiled softly. Because I didn't need to. The truth doesn't need to shout. Jason's big test. Back at the ethics board, Jason was given a challenge. A real-life hearing involving a young girl who had been wrongly accused of theft. The defense lawyer had backed out last minute. The board wanted Jason to step in, under Eliza's supervision. Jason was nervous. I don't know if I'm ready. Eliza looked at him with calm eyes. Then you are. He blinked. What? She smiled. If you were overconfident, I'd be worried. But if you're nervous, it means you're aware. And that's where wisdom begins. In the hearing room. Jason stood in front of the judge. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. The girl's family sat behind him, scared, quiet. The prosecutor looked confident, almost dismissive. But Jason had studied. He had prepared. And now, he had grown. He spoke with clarity. He quoted the law correctly. He spoke with heart, but also with evidence. By the end, the judge dismissed the case. The girl burst into tears. Her mother hugged Jason, whispering, "Thank you." Outside, Eliza waited. Well, she asked. Jason smiled, his eyes wet. I didn't just speak today. I understood today. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Good, because now you're ready to help others understand too. Final scene. Eliza's porch. The sun was setting. Birds chirped lightly in the trees. Jason sat beside Eliza, both sipping tea. I never imagined my biggest lesson would come from someone I once mocked, Jason said softly. Eliza chuckled. That's life, dear. It has a way of humbling us. Jason looked out at the horizon. What's next for you? Eliza smiled. You're what's next. And everyone else who's ready to listen, grow, and lead. Jason nodded, deeply moved. And as the sky turned golden, one thing became clear. The courtroom didn't just witness justice that day. It witnessed a legacy being passed on, from one generation to the next.